Good afternoon. My name is Sean Redmond. I'm going to start today with this little fellow. He reminds us that policy is about people, in this case, young people caught up in situations that they didn't ask for or design. In terms of impact, I'm pretty convinced that this reminder of a young person's unique context, used recently at the European Crime Prevention Awards, contributed significantly to Ireland winning first place for its Greentown programme for children caught up in crime networks. I'm going to talk about him again in a while. In structuring this presentation, I will make the case why youth crime is a good candidate for examining the realist contribution to policymaking. I'll present three mini case examples to demonstrate how a realist approach has contributed to informing youth crime policy in Ireland. In the time available and the subject under scrutiny, I'll have to make a few leaps, but I'm happy to deal with any gaps in the question session. Why is crime a good case study for this conference? First of all, crime is a small percentage of all government spending. Youth crime is a small percentage of all crime spending. Administratively, therefore, youth crime's presence is quite small. But I assert that youth crime has a disproportionate presence in the public mind, be it to do with moral panics or an indicator of crime to come. From a reform perspective, youth crime has been the object of much scientific activity in the public policy space, for example, in prevention science. It spans a range of government competencies. It involves a limited number of actors, and Ireland is also a small jurisdiction. So we get real bang for our buck in terms of looking at the contribution of anything to reform, in this case, youth crime policy, and in this case, realist approaches to evidence building. I am a civil servant in the Department of Justice in Ireland. I am assigned to the University of Limerick to lead a research team called the Research Evidence into Policy Programmes and Practice team, and we're focused on supporting youth crime policy reform efforts. REP is a little different to most policy and academic partnerships in that we are strategic partners with the Department of Justice, providing scientific support to implement policy decisions linked to our youth justice strategy. This means that we are in for the long haul across a range of youth crime related policy activities rather than delivering individual research commissions. We are, I suppose, the scientific help. In order to make the presentation flow in the time available, I need to make a few conceptual leaps, and I'm happy to deal with these in the question session. Here are two of them. First of all, deep reform requires evidence-informed nudges and larger shifts, not just at policy level, but in program and practice areas. Also, deep reform can not only rely on policy adherence via top-down compliance technologies, but also bottom-up sense-making, co-design and co-production, supported by trust mechanisms with practitioners, communities, families, and young people. But what has this got to do with the realist approach? One clear area where small numbers matter is in the area of youth crime, is indicated by this illustration. Big data sets across most like jurisdictions show that young people simply grow out of crime if you let them. Maturation, brain development, taking on new responsibilities are all theorized as being reasons why young people grow out of crime. A smaller number need a bit of additional help, indicated here with the light pink column. Their needs are probably well met by evidence-based programs, and we can be similarly sanguine about this group to eventually grow out of crime. In this illustration, complexity increases as we move right across this curve. A very small group, possibly 3 to 5% of children who commit crime in Ireland, have been referred to by criminologists as the right-hand tail. Studies requiring large numbers are largely incapable of capturing these children's stories. Why is this very small group of interest? Well, we estimate in Ireland that they could be responsible for up to 50% of all youth crime, in particular serious youth crime, and more on this in a while. So, in global terms, a very small number of young people whose contexts are not well covered in the literature are responsible for a vastly disproportionate amount of youth crime, and it follows public investment in the youth justice system. What I've tried to do in these opening slides is to show that in human programs like youth crime, it's fundamentally about people. As indicated by A in this illustration, modern governance creates complicated, complex, and distant pathways between policymakers and frontline, mediated by policies, procedures, contracts, audits, reporting mechanisms, which serve to smooth important contextual differences in understanding people and their lived realities. Often, realist research inhabits the micro, single studies shining light on a new problem or lived realities or context specific solutions. In REP, we've made it our mission to use our research nous to look the wrong way through the barrel, making sense of macro policy through scientifically rigorous examination of small pictures. In short, we look at the relationships between context, mechanisms, and outcomes, the central pillar of realist design, to understand policy problems better and assess the contributions that program efforts make to realizing better outcomes. Hopefully, I've made the case that youth crime is a good candidate for examination and that understanding the context of a small number of young people who form the right hand tail can have significantly disproportionate policy impact. I move now to three practical examples that we have been working on with REP over the last 4 years. I invite you to read the table left to right and consider understanding complex problems, program transfer issues, performance, effectiveness, and efficiency. Are these pressing, cross cutting problems for policymakers? Well, we know they are in Ireland from discussing this with policymakers, but this is an important start point. Pick issues which have value to policymakers. Column 2 lists the many cases that I'll present as evidence of contribution, and column 3 identifies the specific but significant contribution that I think realist approach has made to youth crime policymaking. The first case example is our studies into the effects of crime networks on young people in local communities. I want to give you a very quick summary of almost 5 years' work. This is the primary research started in 2014 that has now contributed to a new intervention program. We start with three anonymized but real locations: Greentown, Bluetown, and Redtown. These locations were selected from national statistics ranking burglary and drugs for sale and supply. These offences are atypical for children in Ireland. They are linked to multiple offences. This talks to the group of young people we referred to as the right-hand tail. The networks that you see are built using police detection data, intelligence data, to link suspects who have collaborated in burglary and drugs for sale and supply. Our job as a research team was deeper examination of these analyst constructed networks using qualitative methods and interviewing specially selected local police from Greentown, Bluetown, and Redtown who had huge tacit knowledge of the individuals involved in these networks. So we replicated this qualitative study 3 times, and we'll be doing this twice again in new locations, Yellowtown and Whitetown in 2021. From a realist perspective, the key building block for the Greentown study is TwinSight. TwinSight requires a police analyst to produce two versions of the network map. Version A, used by the researcher. Each individual is given a unique identifying reference, such as A2. Version B has the same unique identifiers, but in addition, it includes the real names of the individuals involved. This version is only ever seen by the police. As a researcher, I only know A2 as A2. The police officer knows that A2 is Sean Redmond, but we both only call him A2. In the location being examined, 20 to 40 police respondents who have lots of knowledge about the individuals are specially selected to take part in an interview, usually an hour long. In the actual interview, there is a physical space of about 2 to 3 meters between the interviewer and respondent. Any opinions offered by respondents are grounded in facts and events, and we can zoom out to see patterns and zoom in to make explicit individual narratives to offer very thick descriptions. Over and above the patterns disclosed by the quantitative social network analysis, such as who appears to be central in this network, which groups of individuals are gatekeepers of information and communication routes, we were able to paint a far more nuanced picture in Greentown. So, of children involved in closed network relationships on an estate, they were befriended, cultivated, and groomed by mid ranking young adults, who in turn were governed by individuals higher in the pecking order. We called these relationships in the study associate because it was disclosed that they referred mainly to criminal collaborations or were based loosely on friendships. We also noticed another type of relationship, which we called family, because they belonged to a dominant family and kinship group in the neighborhood. These actors got associates to do the work and take the risks. The young people in the family group appeared to be higher in the network than some associate adults. The relationship within the family and kinship network were much stronger and more resilient to interference than the associates. Twinsight helped us to really understand the multiple adversities bearing down on this young person and his friends and start thinking about what we can do about it. Understanding this ecosystem was the point of departure for a longer term deliberative process with international experts that has secured €4.2 million for a new Irish evidence informed programme to reduce criminal network influence on children in 2 locations in Ireland. The point I'm making here is that while quantitative methods cleared a lot of ground in terms of identifying overall patterns of youth crime and isolating the right hand tail, offering means to identify exceptional samples of young people involved in serious crime, constructing a social network map to show patterns of centrality and betweenness. It was really the realist elements, the deep mining of frontline police officer observations and sense making, that has given the program its edge. By understanding the specific context of what added adversities crime networks present to young people compared to a normal environment, and understanding the mechanisms that attract young people to networks and keep them within them. What this exercise also demonstrated, which is of critical importance, is that the Irish version of the crime network experienced in Greentown is significantly different from the UK and US, where most of the gang and network related research and the intervention programs derive from. These differences have operational consequences in terms of effective intervention. Case 2 in some ways is more straightforward, but no less significant in policy terms. It also demonstrates the use of realist approaches in ex ante in making program selections. In Ireland, keeping with our commitment to continually and safely reduce the numbers of children in lock-up institutions, we wanted to invest in a bail supervision program, initially in Dublin, our capital city, to give the court another option to sending children who were a bail risk to a place of detention in remand proceedings. Globally, there were really only 2 to 3 evidence-based youth intervention programs that could fit the bill, and top of the list was multisystemic therapy, a program with an impressive record to bring about positive change with young people in chaotic situations in a number of jurisdictions. MST's record was bolstered by results from a number of randomized control trials, inferring that similar results could be achieved in Ireland. However, we were concerned about implicit assumptions about transferring results and the operating model itself. An example of the difference is that Ireland detains about 1/10 of the number of young people compared to the US, and half of the number in another jurisdiction, England and Wales, where MST has been tried and succeeded. The corollary and obvious fear was that despite the impressive record, MST dealt with young people who had less complex needs in the US and the UK. This prompted 18 months of discussion by phone between a stress testing group made up of Irish officials from the Department of Justice and the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, police and probation services, and the MST program designers in Charleston in the United States. We presented real case vignettes of children in detention at the time to test the MST acceptance criterion. We tested how MST within a bail program would deal with partner agencies and the court imagining real life case scenarios. In the event, we selected MST. This was a very intensive ex ante commitment of policy resources when the received wisdom at the time was to assumed generalized effectiveness of evidence based programs. But imagine if we'd made the wrong choice. Clarifications and small adaptations were identified that could be reinforced in service contracts, as opposed to providers dictating to policymakers about what can and what cannot happen because of fidelity requirements. Furthermore, in our subsequent evaluation of the pilot bail program, which is really well captured in a poster presentation by my colleague Dr. Catherine.Naughton, who majors on mechanisms and outcomes, we committed research effort to documenting the contextual conditions, particularly the acts of state agency and court collaborations that brought about very impressive results. These contextual enabling conditions have become a point of departure for the rollout of this program to other localities and will be of use, I believe, to local governing structures for the program. Case number 3 refers to a large study that REP is undertaking in terms of relationships formed between frontline youth professionals and young people. These relationships are formed when young people get into trouble with the law and are referred to specialist youth programs. The objectives of these relationships, consistent with youth justice policy, is to encourage young people simply to do less bad stuff and do more good stuff. The question is, how do you do this as effectively as possible? To assist practice, can we therefore identify the mechanisms within relationships that appear to be a good bet in terms of bringing about change? If we can do this, then we can also assist policy reform. But why pick on relationships, these small micro venues involving human actors? Well, there's a policy imperative. We estimate that 60% of the 18 million budget for targeted youth programs is linked to relationship building. And I make this distinction as opposed to formal programs. Relationships are a distinct selling point of targeted youth programs. They're really, really important to practitioners, and they're also really important to young people. Relationships have a black box, magical, transformative property, but we really need to understand what these are. Possibly of most importance, policy objectives in human programs are co produced with young people engaged in services where they are co participants in changing behavior. Otherwise, the policy is not implemented. But also, relationships are a bit like democracy to define, and I'm going to talk about this now. Within this targeted youth program, there are 105 local projects dotted across Ireland. Where there is a wide discretion and a practice like relationship building that is difficult to describe and measure, you will inevitably get differences in standards and a risk that a young person has as much chance of a poor relationship with a practitioner as a good one. It's a different type of justice by geography, but no less significant because it's intangible. This is problematic for a policymaker responsible for investing taxpayer funds and aiming to achieve a consistent level of service. Organizational development and governance and implementation literature gives us some indications about what to look for in terms of talented, well supported, challenged, working in organizations which have a terrific working climate, as opposed to burnt out staff going through the motions in less well supported environments. However, there's a clear possibility that these positive and negative factors can coexist without the means to differentiate themselves under the banner of relationships. This exercise is about increasing the number of excellent and very good practice by identifying the ingredients or the mechanisms that predict more effective relationships. The study methodology combines a realist, systematic evidence review informed by the EMI protocol developed by University College London Crime Science Department and working on the ground with practitioners in an action research project to ideate, plan, practice, and review. We are about to publish the results of this work, and we're in the process of final consultation with a group of about 30 practitioners from 16 specialist youth projects across Ireland that have been partnering with us in the co-design journey. So obviously I can't share the results today. But we have identified a small number of mechanisms that we believe it's worth investing effort in trying to achieve within the context of a relationship. And we will now, over a period, test this hypothesis empirically in the in as part of an action research project. Let's be clear though, this is a totally different type of policy governance than more typical agency theory, where policy principles invest incredible effort using various legal, policy, procedural, auditing, and financial levers to ensure compliance by the front line to avoid shirking and opportunism. This type of governance has attempted to engage and enlist frontline practice into identifying the mechanisms for effective relationship building in the hope that co-designed solutions lend themselves to higher standards than might be expected from compliance alone, although this is obviously to be tested further in the field. So let's be clear. Far from peripheral, this realist exercise holds the prospect of improving the yield of 12 million taxpayers worth of investment on routine youth justice practice. I've tried to argue why youth crime is a good case study for looking at the potential value of a realist research contribution to policymaking. In doing this, I've selected three areas that I believe are live and substantive for policymakers responsible for taxpayers' investment. It's a matter for you to determine whether these areas transfer beyond youth crime into other human service domains. I think they do. I tried to pick three mini case examples to demonstrate the value of policymakers recognizing the importance of context mechanisms and the relationship with outcomes in terms of achieving better value. Without bludgeoning the point, this in turn attempts to demonstrate the contribution of a realist approach to modern governance of youth crime policy. Thank you.